Good day to you. Can you check the label on your shirt? Yeah, pause the video and check the label on your shirt to see where it's made. Is it Ecuador? Is it Korea? Is it Taiwan? Is it China? Is it Mexico? You know this beer, right? Heineken. It's a very well-known beer from Holland. Did you know that? From the Netherlands? It's been well known for a long time, right? It's been one of the things that people associate with the Netherlands, is that the H kind of for Heineken is also thought of with Holland. Here's a mouse. Yeah, it came with a computer that I bought. Where do you think it's made? Logitech. Made in Mexico. And so we live in a world with our shirts, with our products that are around us, that is undergoing globalization. We live in a world that is trading with each other all the time. We live in a world that is communicating with each other all the time. And that's what this chapter is about and what I'm covering in today's instructor video. We're talking about globalization, the process that's taking place across the world where economies and governments and peoples and societies are coming closer together. There's more communication going on. We know that globalization is not new. It's just really accelerated right now. It's not new. It actually was happening. Plato talked about globalization and the rise of the nation state. You know, this idea that you would have borders instead of just a fluid territory where people can go back and forth. That was a kind of globalization. And we can say that the slave trade actually was an early example of globalization as well, where you had the slave trading countries of England, Holland, Portugal, sailing to mainly the west coast of Africa and capturing or purchasing slaves and then taking them to the Caribbean. This is the so-called slave triangle, Europe to Africa to the Caribbean, then back to Europe, where the slaves were offloaded onto plantations, and then the plantations' harvests were unloaded onto the boat. So you had molasses, coffee, bananas, etc., going onto the boats, and then they went to Europe. That was the slave trade, but it was also globalization. It was facilitating interaction, as wrong as the reasons were. But globalization today is happening at such a pace that is almost impossible to absorb. It's happening at a pace because of the internet and the ability for people to really just decide, I'm going to, in my mind, go to Alaska today. I'm following a guy on Facebook right now. He's vacationing in Alaska. I'm seeing Alaska every day. I'm seeing his fishing in Alaska. And it's all because of the internet. It's bringing Alaska into my conscience. And this is what is happening today, in addition to our legacy media, right? Television shows, Anthony Bourdain's show before he committed suicide. He was going all over the world, very well-known show, Parts Unknown, to taste and sample food and sample culture. And it's just one example of how globalization is accelerated in today's day and age. So what are some of the reasons why globalization is going so fast? Well, one is what we're going to do this Friday, right? It's international travel. It's become a lot easier. First of all, there's more airplane routes available, more choices of airlines, and you can do it yourself. You can do it on the internet. I booked this group fare on Iceland Airlines myself, and I was able to get the cheapest fare. It's like $800 before taxes, which is very good for the summer. And we're going to fly through Reykjavik. Who would have thought that? The capital of Iceland, as we go on to Copenhagen, and then on to Sweden. And people are doing this every single day. They're changing plans on the spur of a moment's notice because international travel is so very, very easy today. So all this travel is, of course, spurring an interest in the world, an interest in bringing back foods and traditions from those countries that you visit, bringing back a piece of you. And when you come back from Sweden, you will have a little piece of you of Sweden for the rest of your life, whether it's your taste for bread, for example. The Swedes have really good bread, or whether it's your appreciation for nature, something about your trip to Sweden will be inside of you, and that's because of international travel. There's a second reason, though, and that's communication technologies, which I alluded to, and that is our using of the phone today to go onto social media or to surf the web, as well as our laptops, our tablets, and even just being in social settings such as restaurants with TV screens on the wall. Constantly, we're surrounded by screens. And the technologies of the screens is bringing the way that people look and they sound. It doesn't bring smell yet. Smell may be another dimension that comes to our media consumption in the future. TV that emits a smell, they already have experimented with it in movie theaters. But right now, we see and hear people, and that's doing a lot for our understanding of what's out there. So communication technologies are also spurring globalization. And then next up, we have the global media conglomerate. The global media conglomerate is the main reason that we have globalization, because globalization is spurred by profit seeking. Profit seeking is done because companies reach a certain ceiling in the United States. Only so many people are going to watch The Big Bang Theory. There are going to be people who say, oh, I can't stand that show, and they'll never be watching it. There are others that are fanatics about it. But the company still seeks to maximize profit, so it's going to look elsewhere to other markets. So it will look to the UK, it will look to Germany, it will look to Mexico, wherever, to shop this show, The Big Bang Theory, to another country's networks to try and make an additional bottom line off of that product. So you have global media conglomerates, and they've changed since the ones that are printed in the book are listed. The biggest global media conglomerate today is actually the Google company, or as it's really known now, which you may not even know yourself, it's the Alphabet company. That was changed to be the parent company of Google a while ago, and Google owns YouTube. And it owns a lot of other properties that are now related to media. It used to be just a search engine, but it's a media company. As well as the other big ones that you probably know about, like the Disney Corporation, right? That's a huge one, which has not only Disney-related media, such as the ABC channel and ESPN, both of which are Disney properties, as well as the Disney Channel and the Disney movie franchise, but Disney also has theme parks, right? And Disney also has all the franchising of those characters from Mickey Mouse and all the rest of them. So it's much more than just a media company, really. It's a global media conglomerate. It's all over the world. And Disney's got theme parks in Paris and China, right? And you've got the Time Warner company. Time Warner used to be big time into cable systems, also doing Warner Brothers, doing cartoons and films. And then you have the News Corporation. The News Corporation is the parent company of Fox. I don't know if you knew that. The News Corporation also owns the Times in London, also owns the Sun in London. Those are two newspapers. Also owns the B-Sky network, which is the satellite network in the UK, as well as the Star satellite network, as well as dozens of newspapers. The Star satellite network is in Asia. The News Corporation owns tons of properties. Fox, I've already mentioned. And then there's a company called Bertelsmann, which you may not know about. Bertelsmann is a German company, and Bertelsmann has the distinction of being the country that came up with the show for American Idol. It was known as Pop Idol first, and it was actually rolled out in Britain. That's right, the Bertelsmann Company, known mostly for songwriting and publishing rights. That's where it made its money. Had a TV station, Channel 5, or 5 as it's known, in England, and they rolled out this show called Pop Idol. And then the US bought it, Fox bought it, imported the idea, and changed it to American Idol. So those are some really big companies, but each and every day you're being touched by these companies. As you walk around and you hear songs on the radio, or you get flashed by a billboard, or you see a television program at a bar that you're at, or you go to see a movie, you're being touched by these giant media conglomerates every single day, trying to reach for new audiences abroad. So global media conglomerates is also spurring globalization, as well as the final factor, which is audience curiosity. And when was the last time, or when you first tried coffee, did you like it? Probably not. I mean, I'm not a coffee drinker, but I was a long time ago. But I remember when I first tried it, I was like, ugh, because it's so bitter and it's unusual. But after you try it, you become accustomed to it. You can become familiarized with it. It doesn't affect you, the caffeine, in the way that it did the first time you drink it. And you become accustomed to it. You develop an appetite for it. And that's what has to happen with some media programs. Like, some people just can't stand to look at subtitles when they watch French films, for example. Other people, they find the way that people are dressed and the way that they act to be strange or silly when they first start watching foreign films. But after a while, you start to become accustomed to the way that people behave, like you become accustomed to coffee. Audience curiosity is developing also. People are more curious and less insulated, less saying, "Oh, I'm not interested," more curious than ever before. All right, but globalization is criticized. It's criticized by some groups as causing damage and being unfair in some areas. And the first area that globalization is criticized for is by the scholarly community, mostly people like me, professors, and that area of criticism is for media's homogenization. Homogenization, homo means same, right? You homogenize milk. Homogenization of media means you have a lot of sameness out there, because as big as these global media conglomerates are, they are actually very resistant to change. They pursue a low risk strategy. That's what they do. That's why you have so many spin-off television shows. You'll get The Bachelor, you'll get The Bachelorette, you'll have Survivor and all these other shows like Survivor and the contestants getting thrown off the show. You have sitcoms, that break off. One character forms a brand new sitcom. You just have a lot of spin-offs all the time because it's a proven formula, what goes on in a certain sitcom or a certain drama. And corporations, giant media conglomerates, they don't want to take chances with programs that will really cause senior citizens to be offended, or will be too harmful to children, or will be too challenging intellectually to adults, or too racy to conservative people. So TV gravitates to what we call a lowest common denominator, right? There's a lot of sameness, homogenization that goes on in television. And just think about driving across the United States listening to radio. How many times are you going to hear a Bruno Mars song? If you drive from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh and listen to radio continuously. A lot, right? You're going to hear who's popular right now in every single market. That's homogenization at work right there. Another criticism of globalization is unfairness in information flow. That there is an unfairness that goes on. Think of it like if you have a friend or an acquaintance who does a lot of talking when you're around them. You can hardly get a word in. They just talk. They just talk over you. They have more to say. They interrupt you. They talk for longer periods. When they talk about themselves. They just talk. And that's kind of what this is getting at. It's a problem with the flow in the direction of information, where one country has a stronger flow pushing information into another country. It's usually the bigger countries, usually the richer countries, like the United States, right? But also Britain. Britain has a big push of its media all around the world. BBC World Service can be heard in lots of places. France produces a lot of media that go around the world, in Quebec, and in the French-speaking Caribbean islands, like St. Martin. So you have a lot of unfairness that's being charged. And when you think about it, when you think about the story about the boys that were rescued from the Thailand cave, and you think about who told you that information. Was it a Thailand person? No, it was an American reporter, right? So that's part of what is at issue here, is not just in the flow of the information, but also who is representing the country that's being represented. Is it the native indigenous peoples, or is it an American reporter representing Thailand to us? And is Thailand now perceived as a spooky, scary place because the only news we have about it recently is about boys getting lost in these really deep caves that are 3 kilometers minimum underground that go? That's how deep they go inland, 3 kilometers, and they can flood. Is that the perception of Thailand? Is that the perception so skewed because of this being the only story, because the direction and the flow of information is so much about U.S. into Thailand? What's the U.S. doing? What's Donald Trump doing? What's NBA players being traded to what team, et cetera, et cetera. The direction of flow is all skewed, and it also skews the country's representation. So unfairness in information flow. Now, there are different factors that influence whether you'll have information flow. If your country is close to another country, there generally will be flow. There generally will be flow. Radio signals, they don't know boundaries. They'll flow across the border to the country, so you'll have interchange that way. You might have some newspapers that go across the border as well. Television, the same thing. Countries that are next to each other, as opposed to being across an ocean from each other. Language. If you have a similar language, there will be a lot of flow. That's why England or the UK and the United States have a lot of media. That we have a lot of actors that are English. We have a lot of news broadcasters that are English, television personalities. We have a lot of English people who are in our media because we have the same language. We share a language. Also, there are cultural and historical ties that can come into play in making countries close. Again, citing the UK as being one of the founders of our nation, one of the founding countries, you can say, of our nation. It makes us have a strong bond. We see ourselves as having some similarities to the English. Even though we were at war with them and had a revolution against them, we see as having similar cultural, historical struggles. So we maybe that's another reason that we exchange so much media with England. And then there's trade. How much we trade a lot with Japan. So we have Japanese Pokemon, for example, is very popular in the United States. We trade a lot with Korea. Korean-made electronics are very popular in the United States. Then there's the military. Where have military excursions taken place? Our military has been in Afghanistan, has been in Iraq, has been in other parts of the Middle East, and is coming back and bringing traditions and taste for food and expectations for human behavior. And then finally, speaking of expectations for human behavior, there's religion. Countries with similar religions, Catholic countries, tend to have interchanges of media. Countries that are communist do. Countries that are Christian, countries that are Buddhist, etc. All right, so there is an organization that has tried to address some of these inequalities that are causing the unfairness in information flow, and this organization is called UNESCO, and it's a division of the United Nations. It's United Nations Educational, Scientific, UNESCO, can't remember all of it. It tries to fund projects to rectify inequalities across the world, and so UNESCO recommends that funding be provided to develop regional wire services servicing countries that would be normally too poor to generate their own news. A wire service is like the raw news, right? It comes across the wire. It's really electronic, and then it goes to the radio stations and the TV stations, but it comes across as a wire report. So you can have a wire service for the Caribbean, or you can have a wire service for West Africa, or you can have a wire service for northern India. You can have a wire service that will then get that information out from the location that would otherwise not have a story being told about it. Also, UNESCO recommends that indigenous reporters are used. They get a Thai reporter who speaks English to do the reporting on the Thai boy rescue, so that we can have a perspective of a native of that country and therefore a better understanding. And editors, just be mindful of having bad news balanced with good news. Like, we're going to come back and we're going to find a good news story about Thailand to balance this bad news story that's coming out. That's a duty, a moral duty that UNESCO believes that reporters should have. And then that takes us finally to the third problem that people have with globalization, gotten away from it there, that unfairness in information flow is a long problem to talk about, but we've done homogenization, we've done unfairness in information flow. Now we're going to finish up with the spread of cultural imperialism. The spread of cultural imperialism, an imperial country is a country that takes over another country, which used to be done with the military, right? You could have the Imperial British Navy sailing around the world and conquering New Zealand, conquering Australia. That's imperialism. The new imperialism, cultural imperialism, happens because of media. In fact, it's also called electronic colonialism. Think about that, electronic colonialism. It's taking over another country through your media. And so it's outputting so much media that it starts to have an impact on that foreign country. Let's take the way that French eat their meals. And you can see some similarities, by the way, with Sweden. But with the French, you'll sit down at a restaurant, and it'll be forever before the waiter finally comes over to you and asks you if you would like a drink, and you say yes, and he goes away, or she, but usually he, and comes back with your drinks, and then goes away, and there's a long time before they come back with the menu. And then you order the menu, and the first course comes out, and it's an appetizer, and then the second course comes out, and then the third course, your entree, and then your dessert is cheese and fruit, and then you have a digestive that finishes the whole thing off, which is like a shot of vodka-based liqueur made of pear or whatever the local fruit is in France, and you sip that, and it helps you digest the food. That's the way you eat in France, and that's going to be 2.5 hours, and you're expected to exchange pleasantries and not to be rushed, because eating is something that should be done with a relaxed stomach, right? You shouldn't be running off. You should be eating and relaxing and digesting the food and speaking and having a nice comfortable time. So a meal is done that way in most of France. But what happens when you start having McDonald's commercials, when you have Burger King commercials coming into France? Because there are McDonald's and Burger Kings and Wendy's and Chick-fil-A and all the rest of them fast food restaurants, right? And now you have people being depicted in happy situations with a throwaway item in the cup holder of their car, or walking and eating, or eating and talking, and in general hurrying up the eating experience. Do you now then have a fundamental shift in French culture because of the deluge of this kind of imagery coming across in American TV shows? Is that electronic colonialism, the cultural imperialism, is that taking place, or is the French culture so strong that it can beat back major changes like that? That's a question that is to be considered. But the main thrust of this idea is that when you have bigger countries like the United States and smaller countries, even as wealthy as Mexico is in terms of its media empire, it does not put out as much media content as the U.S. does, so it pales in comparison. So when you have a mighty country like the U.S., where the NFL is so popular that it becomes popular in Mexico also, to the extent where they're actually watching NFL games on movie screen theaters, in the theaters. They're watching American football. That's how popular it is. Now you're really starting to understand how cultural imperialism, right, sneaks in. It sneaks into a country. It's all fun, but it sneaks in, starts bringing into country a new way of playing sports, a new way to think about competition, a new way of dressing with garb, a new way of carrying yourself, and as the French are finding out, a new way of eating. And that's what cultural imperialism is. It's often not talked about as a good thing. It's talked about as something to be concerned about. So that's going to wrap up globalization. I hope I've given you some things to think about as we get ready for our trip to Sweden. Have a great day.